I never could have envisioned that my life would take such a dramatic turn that winter in Barcelona. At the age of 35, I thought I had everything in place. My life was as flawless as I could have ever imagined. I had been happily married to Javier for 5 years, had a thriving career that I was proud of, and lived in a beautiful home tucked away in the peaceful outskirts of Sant Cugat. I also just as gladly have not done anything I could not consciously undo. My days were filled with the comforting, familiar rhythm of work, family, and home life, and I felt secure, settled, and content. However, little did I know that everything was about to change in ways I could never have anticipated. It all began with a phone call from my closest friend, Elena. I was sipping my morning coffee, the soft sound of the radio playing in the background, when the phone suddenly rang, shattering the tranquility of the morning. Elena's voice on the other end was laced with urgency and concern, sending an immediate jolt of fear through my chest. At that moment, I had no idea that this seemingly ordinary call would set in motion a series of events that would unravel the perfect life I had tirelessly worked to create. "Amanda, I need to ask you for a significant favor," Elena said, her voice filled with an undertone of worry. "It's regarding my son, Kofi. He has just received his acceptance letter to the University of Barcelona to pursue a degree in architecture, but I don't know anyone there who can assist him in getting settled properly. Do you think you could help him out?" I understood perfectly. Elena and I had been the best of friends since our school days in my hometown, and although life had led us down different paths, she relocated to Madrid while I remained in Barcelona, our bond had remained steadfast and unbreakable. "Absolutely," I replied without a moment's hesitation. "I would be more than happy to help Kofi. He can stay with us until he finds his own place to live." I had a vague recollection of Kofi from the few occasions we had crossed paths during family-friend gatherings. The last time I saw him, he was around 15 years old, a tall and shy teenager who often kept to himself. Now, 8 years later, I was preparing to welcome a young adult into my home, ready to support him as he embarked on this exciting new chapter of his life. On the day of his arrival, Javier and I went to the airport to pick up Kofi. We stood in the busy terminal, waiting for his flight to land, and as I gazed at the crowd of passengers, my mind drifted to what Kofi might be like now, after all these years. I wondered if he would still be that shy, reserved boy I had once known, or if, over the years, had he blossomed into a confident and self-assured young man. I couldn't help but wonder how much he had changed. The answer came rushing to me the moment he walked through the arrival gates. My heart skipped a beat as I caught my first glimpse of him. Kofi had completely transformed into a tall, athletic figure with broad shoulders and a radiant smile that lit up his entire face. His eyes were growing rounder and smaller, his bones taking on a more classical look. His deep brown eyes seemed to hold a kind of wisdom, an intensity that made me feel as though he could see right through me. His dark skin caught the light of the terminal, gleaming under the fluorescent bulbs, while his neatly trimmed hair added an air of sophistication to his otherwise laid-back, easygoing look. For a split second, I was completely breathless. "Auntie Amanda," Kofi called out when he spotted us, using the affectionate title he had always used, even though we weren't related by blood. He wrapped his arms around me in a tight embrace, and I could feel the strength and firmness of his body against mine. It was a completely unexpected feeling, one that made a shiver run down my spine. Instinctively, I quickly pulled away, bewildered by my own unexpected reaction. Meanwhile, Javier, completely unaware of my discomfort, greeted Kofi with the warmth and affection of a loving uncle, his voice filled with joy. During the drive home, Kofi excitedly talked about his plans for university and his eagerness to start this new chapter of his life in Barcelona. As he spoke, I tried my best to stay focused on the conversation, but I couldn't stop stealing glances at him through the rearview mirror. Every time I met his intense, deep brown eyes, I felt a disconcerting shiver run through me. It was as if his gaze held something more than just curiosity. The first few days went by without any issues, and I focused on helping Kofi get settled in. I dedicated myself to showing him around the city, taking him to the campus, and helping him familiarize himself with the surrounding neighborhoods. Javier, my husband, was swamped with his demanding work as a corporate lawyer, which meant he was rarely home, leaving Kofi and me to ourselves for most of the day. It was during one of these city tours that things began to shift. We were walking through the lush, vibrant gardens of Central Park, the sunlight filtering through the trees and casting playful shadows on the path, when Kofi suddenly stopped walking. He turned to face me with a look of deep sincerity in his eyes, and for a moment, I was caught off guard. He said in a soft tone that sent a tingle down my spine, "Auntie Amanda, I really want to thank you for everything you're doing for me. I honestly don't know how I would have adapted so quickly without your help." His heartfelt words made me slow down for a beat. I tried to maintain my composure, forcing a casual smile, though my heart was racing. I replied, "You're welcome." "You don't need to thank me, Kofi. I'm happy to help you." He took a step closer, effectively shortening the distance that had separated us. "No, really. You're truly amazing, Auntie Amanda. I've always admired you, ever since I was just a kid," he said earnestly. His words caught me off guard, and I felt a warm blush creep up my cheeks. For a fleeting moment, I found myself lost in the depths of his eyes, captivated by their intensity. It was in that instant that I realized just how dangerous this situation was becoming, and I needed to regain my composure. I quickly took a step back, breaking the spell that had enveloped us. "We should head back," I said hastily, trying to sound casual. "It's getting late, and Javier will be home soon." The walk back was thick with an unspoken tension that hung in the air between us. I could feel Kofi's gaze lingering on me, and each time our arms accidentally brushed against each other, an electric current surged through my body, sending shivers down my spine. "Remember, this is wrong. Remember, remember," I chanted to myself repeatedly, trying to quell the rising feelings within me. "Remember, remember. He's your best friend's son. He's young enough to be your own son, and you're married, for heaven's sake. Remember," I urged myself, desperately trying to hold on to the boundaries that needed to remain intact. Despite my attempts to stay composed, something had shifted. The next few days felt like a bittersweet torment. Every quiet moment with Kofi became a silent struggle between longing and logic. I began paying extra attention to my appearance, selecting my outfits each morning with the same care as a teenager preparing for a date. One afternoon, as I was teaching Kofi how to use the washing machine in the basement, the unavoidable occurred. The house was empty. Javier, my husband, was away on a business trip. As we leaned down to load the laundry, our hands brushed against each other. We both froze, the tension in the air almost tangible. Slowly, Kofi turned to me, his eyes ablaze with a desire that matched my own. "Amanda," he murmured, and before I could process what was happening, his lips were on mine. The kiss was fiery and passionate, releasing all the pent-up tension that had been accumulating inside me over the past few weeks. My hands found their way into his hair, gripping it as he pressed me firmly against the cold surface of the washing machine. For a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to be completely consumed by the sensation. The taste of his lips, the heat radiating from his youthful, vigorous body as it pressed against mine. I could feel every breath of him, and for just a second, it felt like everything else faded away. But then, like a flash of lightning in the night, reality came crashing down on me. I pulled away from him abruptly, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "No, Kofi, this is wrong. We can't do this," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fear. "Well, not?" he asked, his eyes wide with confusion, yet still burning with desire. "I know you feel it too, Amanda. You can't refute it." I shook my head, trying to steady myself, my breath still shallow. "I'm a married woman, Kofi, and you're my best friend's son. This can't happen," I replied, my words sounding so much firmer than I felt. But even as I said it, every fiber of my being was screaming the opposite. The attraction, the connection. It was undeniable, but I knew what was right. I turned away quickly, rushing out of the basement, leaving Kofi standing there, alone and more confused than ever. My heart was racing, my head spinning. I locked myself in my room, desperately trying to catch my breath. Oh my goodness, what had I just done? How had things gone this far? How had I let myself get lost in this moment? Oh shit, what now? That night, as I lay in bed next to Javier, my husband who had returned late from his business trip, sleep seemed impossible. My mind was consumed by the kiss with Kofi, replaying every detail, the softness of his lips, the warmth of his body pressed against mine, the way his hands tangled in my hair. I could still feel the heat of that moment, and though a heavy guilt weighed on me, there was also a sense of exhilaration. I felt alive, more alive than I had in years. The emotions swirled inside me, pulling me in every direction, and I couldn't escape the overwhelming mixture of fear and desire. The next few days passed in a haze of discomfort, a constant tension that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Every glance I exchanged with Kofi felt loaded with unspoken words. Every conversation we had was stilted, as if we were both afraid of saying too much. Kofi and I tried our best to act as though nothing had happened, putting on a facade of normalcy whenever Javier was around. But the atmosphere in the house had shifted, becoming thick with an unspoken charge. Every accidental touch, whether brushing against each other in the kitchen or passing by in the hallway, seemed to linger longer than it should have. Even the most mundane moments alone together were filled with barely contained sexual tension, as if the air itself crackled with unacknowledged desire. We both knew it, but neither of us dared to address it directly. It was a game we were trapped in, pretending everything was fine, while secretly knowing it wasn't. One afternoon, while Javier was at work, Kofi found me in the kitchen. He came determinedly toward me. "Amanda, we can't keep living like this," Kofi said in a hushed tone. "I know you're married, and I know this is complex, but what I feel for you is genuine. I can't just pretend it doesn't exist." I exhaled deeply, leaning against the counter. I answered, "Kofi, I feel something too, but this isn't possible. There's too much on the line." Then he stepped closer, so near that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. What if we figured out a way? What if we could be together without anyone getting hurt? His words were enticing, dangerously so. A part of me wanted to surrender, to fall into his arms and leave everything else behind, but the rational side of me fought against it. I answered, my voice tinged with sadness, "I don't know how that could be possible, Kofi." "Let me show you," Kofi murmured, and before I could object, his lips met mine once more. This time, I lacked the will to resist. I gave in to the kiss, letting my hands wander over his youthful, toned frame. We kissed with an intensity that felt as though the world might end at any second. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, I realized I had crossed a line I couldn't return from. I could no longer deny what I felt for him, nor could I ignore what he felt for me. Yet, I couldn't overlook the challenges this would bring into our lives. "We need to be cautious," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "If we're going to do this, No one can find out, not a single person. Kofi nodded gravely in agreement. I understand. It will stay between us, he said. And so, our secret affair began. In the weeks that followed, Kofi and I found stolen moments together, sharing secret kisses and touches whenever Javier, my husband, was away. Each encounter was a blend of intense passion and crushing guilt. It felt like being a teenager again, swept up in the thrill of forbidden love, the rush of almost being caught, the knowing glances exchanged during family dinners, the hidden meanings in our text messages. It brought a spark to my life that had been missing for years. But as time went on, the guilt became harder to ignore. Every time Javier kissed me or told me he loved me, it felt like a knife twisting in my heart. The thought of Elena discovering what was happening between her son and me filled me with overwhelming fear. One evening, as Kofi and I held each other tightly in my living room, the weight of our actions became too much to bear. The lights were dim, casting a soft glow around us. The air was thick with the scent of his cologne, mixing with the tension that had been building between us for weeks. As he held me close, I could feel the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against my chest. Strong, yet somehow fragile at that moment. But instead of feeling the usual rush of desire, I was overwhelmed by a deep sense of dread. The walls seemed to close in around us, and the full reality of our situation crashed down on me like a tidal wave. I pulled away from Kofi, my breath catching in my throat as tears filled my eyes. "We have to end this," I murmured, my voice shaking. "I can't keep doing this, Kofi. I can't keep deceiving Javier, my husband. I can't keep betraying Elena, my close friend." Kofi's expression crumbled, and for a moment it seemed like he might protest, might try to persuade me that we could continue, that we could keep this hidden. But then he caught sight of the tears streaming down my face, the pain etched into my features, and he realized I was resolute. "I know," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know it's wrong. I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't stop thinking about you." His words cut through me like a blade, driving the guilt deeper into my chest. I understood exactly how he felt, because I hadn't been able to stop thinking about him either. But that didn't make it right. It only made the betrayal even worse, beyond repair. My voice trembled as I spoke. "We've gone too far. We can't undo what's already happened, but we can prevent it from getting worse. We have to put an end to this, Kofi. We need to stop before we destroy everything, before we destroy everyone we care about." Kofi's eyes, heavy with a sorrow that mirrored my own, met mine as he slowly nodded. He reached out, gently wiping a tear from my cheek, and said, "You're right. We have to stop. But it won't be easy." I nodded in agreement, fully aware that ending our affair would be the most difficult thing I'd ever face. The connection between Kofi and me was undeniable, and the thought of never feeling his touch again, of never seeing that spark in his eyes, was almost too much to bear. Every moment we had shared felt so real, so intense, that imagining life without it seemed impossible. Yet, as unbearable as it was to think about losing him, it was nothing compared to the pain and devastation we would cause if we chose to continue down this dangerous path. The consequences of our actions would be far-reaching and irreversible, and that thought haunted me every waking moment. The next few days dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. Kofi and I both tried to keep our distance, deliberately avoiding each other as though that would somehow make the separation more bearable and more manageable. But the weight of it all was unbearable. The strain of pretending everything was normal, of acting as if nothing had changed, was suffocating. Hiding the truth from Javier, my husband, and Elena, my closest and dearest friend, felt like a heavy burden that pressed down on me more and more with each passing day. The guilt and anxiety were overwhelming, and I couldn't escape the constant fear of being caught, of the truth inevitably coming to light. Then one evening, as I was sitting alone in the dimly lit living room, lost in my thoughts, Javier, my husband, came home earlier than usual from work. He walked into the room quietly and sat down beside me. His eyes met mine, searching them with an intensity that made my heart race uncontrollably, as though he could see straight through me. Javier took my hand in his and pressed it to his heart. "Is something wrong, Javier?" I asked, trying my best to keep my voice steady, though my stomach churned with nervous anticipation. He didn't answer me right away. Instead, he reached for my hand, taking it gently in his grip firm but tender. He looked at me with a kind of tenderness that nearly shattered me. For a long moment, I could only breathe in the weight of his gaze. Then, with a deep sigh, he spoke. "I know," he said, his voice soft, yet strangely resolute. My heart seemed to stop beating for a moment. You know?" I whispered, barely able to force the words out. "I know about you and Kofi," he said, his voice barely audible, but it struck me like a thunderclap. The room seemed to spin around me, as if the very ground beneath me had suddenly disappeared. I tried to speak, to respond, but no words came out. All I could do was stare at him, my mind racing, trying to comprehend how he could possibly know this. "I saw the way you two looked at each other," Javier continued, his voice thick with pain and disbelief. "Amanda, at first I didn't want to believe it. I told myself I was just imagining things, that I was being paranoid. But then I found the messages on your phone, and after that, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't ignore what was right in front of me." Tears poured down my face as I fully grasped the depth of the hurt I had caused. In my selfish pursuit of desire, caught up in the excitement and temptation of the affair, I had completely ignored the man I had promised to love, honor, and cherish. I had betrayed the very person who had placed his trust in me, and the guilt of that realization was suffocating. Through the sobs, I choked out the words in front of my husband, my voice barely audible as I spoke to my husband. "Javier, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen." The words seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds, and yet they felt so inadequate to express the pain I was feeling. Javier squeezed my hand gently, his own eyes brimming with unshed tears. His face was a mixture of hurt and confusion. "I know, Amanda," he said softly, his voice carrying an underlying sadness that cut me to the core. "But that doesn't change what happened. I understand that you didn't want to hurt me, but I need to understand why. Was there something I did wrong? Was I not enough for you? Was I not enough to make you happy?" His words were true and filled with vulnerability, and they broke me even further. "No, Javier," I said quickly, shaking my head fervently, trying to reassure him, even though my own heart felt like it was shattering. "This isn't your fault at all. You were always enough. You still are. I made a terrible mistake. I let myself get caught up in something I should have walked away from the moment it began. I was selfish, and I let my emotions completely take over. But none of this is about you. It's about me and my own deep flaws." We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the heavy weight of everything that had been said lingering in the air between us. The silence was terrible, filled with the unspoken understanding that things could never be the same again. The pain in my chest was unbearable, knowing how much I had hurt him and how much we had lost. At last, Javier let out a deep, resigned sigh and left his hand away from mine. "I don't know what to do," he confessed, his voice trembling. I love you, Amanda. But I don't know if I can ever move past this. I don't know if I can ever trust you again." His words felt like a dagger to my heart, and in that moment, I understood the gravity of what I had done. I could feel the painful truth sinking in. I might have lost him for good. The thought was overwhelming, and I couldn't hold it in any longer. I broke down in a fit of sobs, the full weight of my betrayal crashing down on me. Javieri stood up and made his way to the door. He paused for a brief moment, then turned to glance at me, his gaze filled with a mixture of sorrow and uncertainty. "Donna Pinier, I need some time to think," he said softly. I have to figure out if I can forgive you. But I want you to remember that I love you. I always have, and that's why this hurts so deeply." With those words, he turned and left the room, leaving me alone with my swirling thoughts, my guilt, and the paralyzing fear that I had ruined the most important thing in my life. I felt as the door clicked shut behind him, it hit me. No matter what happened from that moment on, nothing could ever be the same again. I had made my choice, and now I had to face the consequences. The affair was over, but the scars it left would always be with me, a constant reminder of the pain I had caused and the trust I had shattered. Sitting there in the dim light, I knew the hardest part was yet to come. The long and painful process of trying to rebuild what had been broken, if rebuilding was even possible. That's the wrap for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please give us a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on all our future videos. Your support is incredibly important to us. Take care, and see you soon.